Fragments of silicon, even in your mornings.
All right. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location in the globe. Welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon European Interviews. Joining us this week is Tom Kail of Inkle.
Hello.
Hello. How are you doing tonight or today?
Very well. It's the middle of the afternoon. It's like an indescribable period of day. There's no particular greeting for that, I think.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Like, right. So last time we had Inkle on the program, it was your partner John Ingold, and we talked about Heaven's Vault. But
Yes.
here today, we are talking about your new release, Pendragon, of which I understand you are the principal design lead on.
Uh, I think that's in the credits. Yeah. I think I've got the top slot on that one. So I was the dev design guy on it. And it was a prototype of mine that we used to tinker with that the sort of project sort of grew out of. So I think that's probably why I've got the top billing on that one.
It's possible. So, right, for the uninitiated, what is Pendragon?
So Pendragon is a tactical narrative game, which is, I think, quite a new take on the genre. So it is a tactics game that tells a story as you play with your characters who are real, characters. They're real people, and you move them around in a sort of chess style fashion. But they'll respond dynamically to where you are on the board, whether they're being threatened, who they're talking to, who's around them, what's happened to them in the past, and basically anything that you can sort of imagine. So we wanted to basically build, I suppose you can look at it as chess, but the characters are real live people who respond to the moves of the other characters on the game.
I let's see how to approach this, because telling a story within the tactical strategy genre is not a new thing, but I think it's more in the details of how this plays out.
Right, yeah, completely. I mean, typically, at least from my experience, there's a lot of tactic games that have stories in them, like Fire Emblem or whatever, but they tend to tell the story more outside of the battle, or there's kind of, at least the actual core storytelling parts are done outside in cutscenes or in visual novel style, and there's a bit going on in the board. But what we've tried to do is something where the moves you make on the board tell the story directly. So if you move a piece into danger, that is a direct choice in the story. It's not just something they'll comment on later. That is absolutely your narrative choice, as if you were playing Fallout and you had 4 choices. That is one of them: sacrifice your piece.
Right.
So we wanted to make something far more real, I suppose, and something that really puts you in the role of both storyteller and tactician at the same time.
Once again, you brought up Fire Emblem, and Fire Emblem does that to an extent. Like, for example, it's got permadeath, and who dies on battle will affect the story in various ways. But
Sure.
yeah, I don't think I've encountered a strategy game that paints it as a literal novel. And I'm wondering, where did the idea first come from? Fusing tactics to actual narrative storytelling.
So, like I mentioned, this was originally, it was me fiddling around with tactics games prototypes in my spare time, and we sort of just took to playing it at work when we were doing Heaven's Vault in lunchtimes and pub breaks and this sort of thing. And John, who is our writer and narrative designer, sort of took an interest in it and started trying to think of ways that we could blend the sort of games that Inkle is known for, the sort of games that we normally make, which are highly story driven, highly responsive to how you play, but also have very somewhat authored stories. You're very free to explore, but everything is written directly. All of the responses are very authored, I suppose. And I think it was something that had been floating around in the ether for a while. As John has mentioned, making a sort of classic roguelike, like an actual rogue, that tells a story as you pace around the board, because it is a game that tells stories already. It's just that it doesn't write them down. The story is happening. It's entirely the tactics and entirely, oh, there's a dragon and I killed the dragon. But actually, it'd be really cool if you could have, them be a real character, and it's a character with history. And when the character encounters the dragon, they say, you killed my father. I will have my revenge. And if they get burned by the dragon, the game will remember that. And have the game really bring to life what the rules of the game.
And I can see where that came from. Right there. Anyway, but so at what point did this? Hang on. So at what point did this go from prototype to full-on dev projects?
That was a blurry one. It just sort of happened to some degree. It was just sort of something we were playing around with a lot. And then when Heaven's Vault finished, I think at that point we already knew that it was the next project, because I remember that when the game finished, we had all of our artists immediately switched over to doing art on this before we'd even started building it properly. I think it was just something that we were really excited to do. And we knew we wanted to do something shorter and to some degree simpler than Heaven's Vault, which was a sort of big 4-year project. And we really wanted to just do something that was pared back and just trying to do one thing really well. So I think it was the right project for the time for us, because I think it came to about a year overall, the development time for Pendragon, which is, for games, really quite short.
Yeah. As I mentioned, we spoke about Heaven's Vault just last year. And
right. Yes.
I was kind of surprised that your next project was releasing this quickly. But I suppose that is the advantage of having a smaller project. Anyway, so how does this game take into account all of the different moves that you can make on a battlefield?
So narratively?
Mm-hmm.
So the way that it works is extending from the technique that we used on Heaven's Vault. So the way that Heaven's Vault works is there are a lot of different options that the game has that you can make at any time, but a lot of the options are totally hidden or they're invalid for any given moment. So let's say that there are 500 things that the story could decide to talk about next, or things that it could decide to do. Maybe it wants to put you in a cutscene, or maybe it wants this character to talk about how you've got the crown. Maybe it's the robot wants to pipe up and talk about this thing that you saw earlier. How it works is it takes all of the things that the story can talk about and it prunes them all down into a much shorter list by looking at where you are, who you're currently talking to, what time of day it is, what you're looking at, like everything you could possibly imagine that would be important for the context. So that the thing that it actually decides to show you or that it decides to do in response to your actions is just something that just makes sense. But you didn't necessarily choose it. So perhaps you walk towards something and the robot pipes up and starts talking about this, or perhaps you're talking to a character and they don't really know what to say next, or you come to the natural end of the conversation and then they want to strike up a new conversation and it'll just do it organically based on what you know, or it'll offer you options that you want to know about, but the only reason that the game knows to offer you those options are because of the very specific route you've taken through the story. So we think this is basically quite a unique take as well. I don't think there are many games that do this. Typically, games will have a very authored script that says, right, there are 3 choices. If you choose these 2, we'll do this. If you choose this one, we'll do this, and then we'll recombine later on. But what we tend to do is this approach where you have all of the options are available at any time, and then we sort of trim them right down, and we only show you the best ones. So that's exactly how Pendragon works, except for all of the choices are completely hidden, except for the odd bit of dialogue choice. So there might be a choice like Guinevere takes Wolf, and that would be one of the many, hundreds of choices that are available. And that choice, when taken by literally performing the move, will look at the state of the board and it will say, well, does taking the wolf mean that you win, or does it mean that like Guinevere has taken revenge on this wolf that killed one of her friends earlier on? Or does it mean that Guinevere has killed this wolf, but she's put herself in danger by doing so? If she's put herself in danger by doing so, can Lance get revenge on that wolf? And so the story code is doing some really complicated data crunching based on the state of the game, based on what move you made, and then how that move affected the game state. So that's kind of the basics of how it works. It really is an immensely complicated thing. So John, who is our writer and narrative designer, like I say, I think his side of the code is actually more complicated than mine, which is sort of unheard of for a game, with a story, because typically the story isn't really scripted at all, or if it is, it's a little bit of if you do this, do this. But it's just this immensely complicated web of options and choices and states that can happen.
If this were coming from another developer, I'd probably be surprised at this particular bit of knowledge. But given what you guys do, yeah, this is about what I expected.
Right. It really is mental. We've talked about it a little bit with our sort of community on Discord. And they're always quite surprised about the way that we do things as well, because the language that we use to make this game is our own language. It's called Ink, and it's designed entirely for writers to make hugely branching interactive scripts. But we have taken that and bastardized it again. We keep taking what we know how to do with this stuff and then extending it in really weird ways. It's definitely not a normal use of the language, but it completely supports it. It really is just a big list of options with states, much like a programming language, I suppose. So it's really only due to the fact that we have our own framework for writing this stuff that we're able to make this kind of game, at least without spending a long time developing the technology first.
Right. I think Ink has featured in every one of your projects to date.
That's right. Yeah, it's kind of evolved over that time. So the version that we have now, I think we call it Ink 2 internally, or at least we would if we had any reason to talk about Ink 1. So Ink 1 was used for the sorcery games, and then I suppose Ink 1.5 or closer to 2 was 80 Days, and then Heaven's Vault was this sort of upgraded one that we eventually made public, and that anyone can use for free. There's absolutely no... it's like an open source license. You can go and do whatever you'd like to it. You can release your own games and modify the code. So yeah, we sort of built a community around people who are interested in writing stories as much as they are reading our stories.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And has anyone taken up making a game with your open source Ink tool?
Oh yes, yeah. No, it's I don't want to go and say it's very popular. It's quite well known among interactive writers. We heard that Sea of Thieves was using it. Apparently, we don't know what for, but apparently, when we were told this by a friend of Joe's who works at Rare, and when we found out and put it on Twitter, Microsoft found out and said that they had to credit us, because you don't have to credit us because it's all open source, but apparently Microsoft have quite a strict policy that says if you use somebody else's tech, you have to put it in the credits. So we ended up in the credits to Sea of Thieves, apparently. I don't even know how you read the credits in that game. But that's, I suppose, the best known game that we know of that uses Ink, but there are certainly plenty of others. We used to cite the Banner Saga a lot, which used an early version of Ink, but these days there's lots of games like Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. We've heard that the guys who did Firewatch are playing around with it, but I have no idea what's going on with that. I think a lot of people use it as a sort of scratch pad. A NeoCab recently, that's Ink as well.
Yeah. I'm as far as Firewatch, they were working on a game called In the Valley of Gods, but that's been put on hold. They got shifted over to Half-Life Alyx.
Yeah, I heard about that. I don't know much more. We've only met those. Well, at least I've only met those guys one time. They were lovely.
Yeah, I still hope that game comes out, because I liked Firewatch, and I was looking forward to that. Nothing against Half-Life Alyx, just But anyway. So we've talked a lot about the genre and the writing of Pendragon, but we haven't actually talked about the actual story, the setting, and all that stuff of Pendragon. And the name might give it away that it's attached to Arthurian legend.
That's right. Yeah.
But this is some radical reinterpretation of Arthurian legend from what I saw.
Yes, no, I think that's true. I think John, who is a writer, would probably argue that every interpretation of Arthurian myth is a radical reinterpretation.
I think this came up in our review, but yeah, we did talk about Arthurian legend, and yeah, let's just say it's not like what's canon and what's not, and like is ever shifting to say the least. Like
That's right, yeah.
It's like you could conduct an entire course on the changes in Arthurian legends, and I'm not even joking about that.
Yeah, no, you really could. It goes back a long time, and people don't really know the roots of it, as I'm aware, or at least not particularly well. But certainly the events of the plot are canonical. They're the sort of one bit that is fairly in stone, I believe, which is at the very end of the story where Mordred, who is King Arthur's nephew, has declared war on him and is trying to take the kingdom, and the Round Table has fallen apart. It's scattered. In some versions of the story, Lancelot and Queen Guinevere had an affair, and that's helped to tear the kingdom apart. Many of the noble knights have left for good. Guinevere has, in some, and certainly our version of the legend, has gone off to join a convent. So it's kind of the darkest timeline part.
Yeah, that is where many of the Arthurian tales end up. But I suppose to back up a bit, what made you want to select the Court of King Arthur as your framework for this game?
Specifically Arthurian myth or the court itself?
Arthurian myth.
Right. Yeah, so I don't quite actually remember how it happened. I think it was just one of those things where we were throwing around themes for a while, and as soon as we realized that that's what it could be, it just completely stuck. I think maybe because of the legacy of the kind of game it is. Like, it's a game that a lot of people have compared to chess in that, you move one piece at a time, and it's quite, if you can lose pieces very quickly. And I suppose chess is considered to be a sort of medieval warfare setting, if it seemed to have one. And we'd sort of been talking about the characters as if they were knights. So I think as soon as we landed on Pendragon, we sort of realized, well, this is a brilliant theme and no one is doing it. And it's one of those themes that's quite well known, and it's in the open, like it's sort of open for anyone to go and use and do whatever they like with. And nobody's done it in a while, which is kind of the holy grail for us. I mean, this is one of the reasons that 80 Days was such a wonderful adaptation for us, is because it was a story that everyone's sort of familiar with, that we could run off and take and do our own thing with. So it really was just the perfect theme for the game. And we never even looked at changing it after it kind of just became the idea.
No, I can certainly see the connection here. Like, strategy tactics game, narrative, with rich narrative. Yeah, Arthurian stories will fit. And was there any particular reason why you selected, the end of the story versus, like getting the fellowship together, or, somewhere else in the timeline?
This would be more one for John, I think, who wrote the game. But my understanding is that it was really a reflection of the political situation in the UK at the time, where there's this real sense that that somebody has come in and ruined what was quite a good system. That there's a lot of division, there's a lot of hatred, there's a lot of dualism. And I think it was a sort of reaction to that, quite honestly. It was a reflection of the times that we live in.
Relatable. I'm like, certainly in this year of 2020, that is unfortunately relatable. Not right. Just in the UK either.
Yes, no, we're very aware.
But anyway, and getting back to the whole radical reinterpretation, to further define that, like one of the starter characters is Guinevere, um, who is quite the active character. Like she's someone who wouldn't really have agency or importance in like the Arthurian tales of long ago. Was that a conscious choice, or is that just something that was born out of the development of the game?
I'm fairly sure it was quite a conscious choice. We definitely wanted to put a bit more representation in, partly because it's the right thing to do, but also because a lot of the heroes in Arthurian myth are quite boring. Like, there's like Guinevere is not a particularly interesting character. She doesn't have very much agency in the story, and she really could. She could be an interesting character. She has interesting things happen to her, and the same is true of, I think, quite a lot of the characters. They're often quite one-dimensional in the myths. Like, they are heroes, they go out, they do heroic deeds. Sometimes they screw it up and then they're killed, and sometimes they do it well and they are noble and just. And I think we wanted to do something where the characters are just a lot more nuanced, and a lot more just interesting. Honestly, they're allowed to have flaws, they're allowed to have personalities, they're allowed to have relationships with each other. Um, I don't think it would have worked if we'd kept it to the Arthurian script, which certainly has tone, but I don't think many people could tell you very much about any of the characters.
Like, yeah, that depends on the character, I think, and what you're reading. Like, some would say that some of the points of, say, some of the French work was making, say, Lancelot or Percival or Gawain interesting.
Sure.
And once again, this is just carrying on a tradition, because, yeah, the Arthurian legends, they're not, say, the Bible, or there's no strict canon outside of certain events. But even then, stories change, and this is just one more reflection of that. Um, you know, um, we've talked a bit about the heroes, but like, who is in the game outside of Guinevere and Lancelot, who are your two starters?
Right, so you've got Morgana. Who have we got? Blimey, I haven't looked at it in a week or so. I've been on holiday. So you've got oh my God, what's the full list of the characters? You've got Gawain, who is a Welsh knight. You've got Morgana, who is the sort of witch, who is at least mischievous, if not downright evil, but she sort of turns to the right side. You've got Merlin, who is the wizard, and we've got a couple more knights who I think were not particularly well known in the canon, such as Sir Borloas, and we've got the archer, whose name escapes me right now. I think we have 8 characters that you can play as you go through. They're all unlockable. We only give you Lance and Gwen to start off with, and as you encounter them in the game and play with them, you're allowed to play them from their starting location the next time, which sort of quite radically changes how the game tends to play out, because you'll be starting in a different place, you'll have different abilities, they'll more or less easily encounter or have positive relationships with the other characters they meet. So yeah, they're all quite different people.
Indeed, and I suppose that how much of a bearing does that have on the endpoints? Like, how much does it matter if you have Lancelot or Guinevere at the Battle of what is it, Cannabis?
Canlan. Battle of Canlan.
Yeah.
It'll make quite a big difference. So they'll all have different relationships with the evil Sir Mordred, and that will come out. So Guinevere is, well, I don't want to give too much away, but certainly Guinevere has the most well-known connection to Mordred's, because she is the wife of Arthur, and Arthur is obviously his uncle. But all of the characters will have different relationships, and you can, of course, bring Arthur to the battlefield as well. Yeah, so no, the game will be really quite different. I don't want to sound too cliche, but it's very much about the story that happens along the way as well, and certainly getting to the final battlefield with a party of different knights will give you a very different experience when you actually get there. For starters, it will be a little bit easier if you've got different knights, but if they've had more things happen to them along the way, maybe they've lost friends, they've gained relationships, this kind of thing, then they'll have more interesting abilities that they can use, which might make that easier or harder for you.
And well, this is a question I don't know how much you can answer, but in regards to the ending, is it always going to end in a particular fashion, or can you like, can you save Arthur? Like, does he have to die? Does Camelot have to fall?
Camelot has already fallen in the story. There's not very much that you can do to save it, but you can certainly kill Mordred. And how the story, like, there's a short epilogue at the end, but I think you're going to have to use your imagination to some degree to imagine what happens to the kingdom afterwards. But the round table is at least broken. But certainly, if you can get a whole party of people there and give them keep them alive and still win the game, then you'll get a much happier ending. I wouldn't want to give too much away without people getting there themselves.
Of course.
But it certainly responds quite dynamically to the way that you reach the end.
No, that would be expected. Just trying to suss out how much might be locked in, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's not particularly locked in at all, really. I mean, I suppose in some ways you can look at it as either you kill Mordred or you don't, but it's a lot more nuanced than that, and the dialogue will completely change depending on who you get there and how you get there.
Yeah. Now, how long will a run last you in Pendragon? Like, how long will it take to, get to the battle and fight Mordred?
So typically half an hour will get you to the end, but obviously you can take a lot more weird little detours around the map, or you can have a harder time finding Camlan, which is always placed in a different place, and you don't really know where. You just have to sort of journey north until you sort of catch a scent of it. But the game can be quite punishing.
Strategy game.
Take a lot less. It's quite short.
It's pretty quick for a strategy game, actually.
Yeah, no, it really is. I think we consciously wanted to make something that was just very replayable, and also because it's a very punishing game. If people got themselves into a tight spot, we would rather that they started a fresh story, that their story ended tragically, and then they were able to go again. There's no sense dragging it out. It's, I suppose, the same kind of curse that XCOM has, where, if you've lost 2 people early on, you might as well restart. But that's not very satisfying for us to just have the user say, right, I think I'm not going to win this one, I'll restart it. So you get a much more interesting story if the game decides, no, you're not going to win this. You're going to die, and we're going to make this into a story in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see the intent here. It's less about the actual strategy mechanics and more about the story around them. Because,
I think that's fair.
Once again, we mentioned this in our review because the actual tactical elements here are on the light side.
Yeah, very much. It was really our goal to build something that held together and had cohesive rules that you could play around and produced interesting situations. But we weren't quite consciously weren't looking to build something that was hugely complicated or overshadowed the story of the game. Mm-hmm. Like, we certainly wouldn't have wanted to make XCOM or something like that.
Yeah. I get the idea here. It's like, and in terms of like the strategy mechanics, it's doing a few interesting things that I haven't seen elsewhere. Probably because, if it were put in a Fire Emblem game, I think people would have revolted. And that's like the morale system.
Yes, the morale system. So the idea with that was, well, it's part of the thing that I mentioned before, which is to make sure that you can't just play around endlessly on a board, or you can't, like, if things are really going badly, the party is going to fall apart, which kind of reflects how it would in the story as well. Like, if your band of heroes, they haven't been fed in a while, and they keep dying and they keep having to retreat, they'll just fade away. They'll wander off. They won't keep their motivation. Like, they're on a sort of hopeless quest already. but it's also to try to keep the pace of the battles right. We don't want. It certainly is strategic sometimes to sort of strafe around your opponent and wait for them to make a mistake, but we also didn't want people to do that endlessly. So it was a way to make there be a sort of a trade-off between, do I want to wait for them to make a mistake, or do I want to go elsewhere and cut my losses early?
Yeah, like I figured that there was the idea behind it because, like I said, if you put this in Fire Emblem, it would be hate because a lot of the point of traditional tactics games are the battle and figuring out how to win that battle. Not saying that that doesn't occur here, but it is tied to this whole narrative system.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, I mean completely. We weren't really interested in trying to make something like Fire Emblem, one of the established genres, because we wanted to make it a lot simpler. And we didn't really at any point look at the game and sort of compare it to those designs. They're really trying to do very different things, I think. And we were far more influenced by things like chess, but I think we were basically influenced by what the game wanted to be more than anything else. Like, we had these very simple core rules, which is that you'd claim territory and then you could use that territory to move faster. And everything really just came naturally out of that. We didn't have to look afield to see what other games were doing, because in a lot of ways they weren't doing anything that had the same sort of specific rules. The only thing that we really share is that we have a grid-based board and movement across it, which isn't, it's quite a loose template.
Right. And what does the future hold for Pendragon? Like, is this game going to be ported to mobile or consoles?
So we haven't announced anything for any consoles yet, but it's certainly something we're interested in doing. We've been doing a little bit of support work for it recently. So something we did recently was we added a sort of rules system to the pause screen, so that people could more easily understand and sort of remind themselves of the core rules, because if you forget them, they can be quite punishing. And that was something we sort of borrowed from how FTL does it, where they play you a little video and they show you, look, this is exactly how this thing works, which I really liked. Like, it's quite hard to get people to learn how to play a tactics game. And so that was a feature that we got in sort of a week after it came out, because we realized it was actually really, really important. Like, if people didn't understand the rules, they really weren't likely to have as much fun as we'd hoped.
And, okay, so you haven't announced consoles, but any mobile plans?
No mobile plans at the moment. We're still very interested in doing mobile. We did talk about this originally as being a mobile game. We were sort of interested in it being an Apple Arcade title, but Arcade has moved quite consciously away from this kind of thing now. And we'd still be interested in doing it. But I think maybe we aren't sure if it would be a success or not, and it would be quite a bit of work to port it.
I could not say, but, like, what direction has Apple Arcade moved in? I gotta admit, I don't really keep up with that particular service.
Yeah, fair enough. And we were really, really interested in it when it came out. I mean, this is me just sort of my own personal opinion, really. Like, it had some incredible games when it came out, and I had a really nice first week with it. And I think that was my impression looking at Twitter anyway, that lots of people subscribed to it for a month or so, and were really talking about it. Like, Sayonara Wild Hearts remains one of my favorite games, like, ever. It's really well done, but they sort of they stopped releasing interesting things for it, or like the time between interesting releases kind of grew and grew and grew. And people just stopped talking about it. And my impression is that Apple have completely moved away from all of the games that I found interesting, which were the more sort of, campaign-based, authored stuff. And they're much more interested in infinitely replayable games, which is, your classic match 3 puzzlers or that kind of thing, which I feel like, is already on the platform. And it's not really the sort of thing that we're interested in making. Which is a shame, because we really liked the kind of games that they were originally promoting and funding. So we would have been really happy to bring our games to that platform. And mobile has been wonderful for us. Like, it's the perfect form factor for telling interactive stories because it's a brilliant device for reading text on and for interacting with. But we're not sure if the market is still there for it right now, and it's quite hard to tell. So we're sort of still watching it, but it's not any of our immediate plans.
Well, it would be unfortunate if this game missed mobile because I just work there pretty well enough.
Yeah, it would. I mean, I'm just watching the stream now and sort of looking at, actually the UI sizing is about right as well. It maybe wouldn't be as much work as I sort of originally thought. So yeah, maybe we should look into it. Maybe it's something we could do reasonably easily. But yeah, maybe watch this space.
Okay. And final thing I want to ask about is the campfire tales. So, in the game, at certain points, you should rest. You can skip that, but it's not necessarily good for your health or your morale. But anyway, when you do rest, you can talk to your companions, and they will tell various campfire tales. And I'm wondering, are these historical tales, or are these stuff that were created, like by other people?
So they were, by and large, all written by the community specifically for this game, and they're all original. I think a few of them are sort of riffing off existing sort of tales. And yeah, they're like one of the most interesting little things that came out of this for us. I think originally it was because John knew that we were going to have these little campfire stories, and he was going to write them at some point. But I think maybe he was sort of struggling to find motivation to write 20 or 30 of these things. And so I think we just sort of posted on Twitter, if somebody wants to do it, we'll pay for some great little stories. And we had so many stories come in, like it was such a positive response. And so many of the stories were just utterly brilliant. And so I think in the end, we ended up taking a lot more of them than we thought we would. And there's just a huge range of stories in there. Like some of them are comedy, some of them are tragedy, but they all have heart. And they all feel like campfire stories. They all feel like stories with sort of real morals to them. So yeah, they're one of my personal favourite parts of the game.
And how many of these tales ended up making it into the game?
I want to say 28. I think it's something like that. Certainly enough that you'd have to play for quite a few hours to find them all. I'm pretty sure we don't give you the same one twice, if you can avoid it at least.
And how many ended up on the cutting room floor?
Oof. I think we had about 100 responses in all. And as I remember, like 90% of them were excellent. So, yeah, the ones we took ended up being just the cream of the crop or ones that spoke to us. But certainly we'd have liked to have more, I think, but we really couldn't afford to pay that many people.
Right. Anyway, I'll see if my colleagues here have any further questions for you at this point in time.
Okay.
I think I'm good.
My curiosity has been satisfied, and sorry, my mouth is full.
Sorry. Well, then that'll about do it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me.
No, not a problem. I was wondering, having you on the program, Tom. Looking forward to what Inkle does next. Whatever that might be, and we'll probably be in contact when that's ready to be talked about.
Brilliant. Oh, I can't wait.
Indeed. All right. So in the meantime, the game is Pendragon. It's available on the Steam store, going for $16.99. And it's got the soundtrack available for $9.99, and the deluxe edition is currently going for $24.28. Be sure to pick it up today. All right. Yeah, that'll about do it for this installment of the Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to join us for the Sunday reviews, and until then, I shall wish you good gaming.